भाई इधर इंग्लिश नॉट ज्यादा खानी रहती ज्यादा करेगा इधर नॉट दिखती है ज्यादा मुझे कुछ नहीं लगे मुझे कोई नहीं पड़ेगा मुझे नहीं हुआ मेरा बात आज फिर के एकदम भाई इधर आके पढ़ने इंग्लिश चला दे रहा हूं चुप बैठ तू कुछ सारा पढ़ चलो बैठिए मैं उधर वो मैंने तो कितना है थी ना उसके बाद बाबा को भी सुना है सुमन आज के बता आप मुझे कैसे काम नहीं पर आज तक के सारा इसको भी देखो नहीं इसको नहीं मेरे को नहीं तुझे पूरा पूरा छापा अरे देख ये उसका छाप के उसका नाम मैं अपना समझ सकता हूं पवार ने मेरा छापा उसको मेरे नाम लिखा ये तो कोई हद ही होगी मतलब पता नहीं आप बताइए तो पेपर आ गए होते हैं you expecting some other lecture today? Why do you know no the next time? You want to get down? I mean, हाँ उनको आज ही परसों का टाइम टेबल कैसे? हाँ हम लोग स्कूल से आए फिर हम लोग खाना खाते तो मोबाइल देखिए हिंदी के मैसेजेस भी आते हैं फेसबुक और इंस्टाग्राम जैसे पूरा हाल में हम देखते हैं I know this 2-3 days back. Obviously, you also got messages 2 days back. No, I So we already did agents of pollination and what are they called? Student textbook. पूरा बॉडी है नाम को नाम में हाईलाइट करा नाम में हाईलाइट दीजिए so now next we are going to study the character. Did we study the agents of pollination, the characteristics? Yes. For absent the other day. Yes, I have not read. Okay. Now look at that. The other characters gave you a small chart regarding what the agents pollination. What is the name regarding the agent? Referring to the agent. And then what do you call the plant? What do you call the process? No. Say suppose if I talk about wind as an agent, what is that type of pollination called? And the plant is called yes. And an example? Maize. Maize. So we have to okay. Now that is very fast to go through these characteristics of 3 main types. As for your syllabus, you have got basic characteristics to study of plants which are wind pollinated, water pollinated and insect pollinated. Only these 3 you will study. But we studied some extra also, like pollination by birds is called, or pollination by elephants is called, Elephant. These are the extra, but the characteristics of the plants we are not going to study for. Yes. Now let us study about the organ. Ma'am, organ so ornico. Okay. What did you write ornico? Because you're busy talking with data. No, ma'am. Huh? And what about this other boy? Asha. Where is the other ball gone? Same it is. It's coming from this one. Actually, it's not on the clock. Actually, Rudra, Rudra is other ball. He is also not good. He's not coming for other subjects also. The game is scared of him.
Absolutely.
But why is this so irregular? Is it your phone? Uddar. What happened there? It's maybe I can change it. This is very much. There is a village. But I will go through those characteristics and after that I will give you some questions and will answer. Turn to page 41 fast. Turn to page 41. Now let us just go through these characteristics and I'll ask you certain reason questions as I discuss. Listen carefully. Try to start here. Points are contradictions or nature favors prosperity. At a confidence we have to finish. No problem. Then I'll do later. Since I've already started this, let me complete with this first. Okay, confidence is that extended, not right. So agents of cross-pollination, let us now study this first. Agents of cross-pollination. See the points now that we are moving into this. Now, insect pollinated plants case, which are some of the characteristics that you have to remember with reason. Let's start with the first part. If it is insect pollination, what is the process for entomophily? Entomophily. There you go. Look at those characteristics. Number one, I asked you to check. Number one, the plants are large. If it is insect pollinated, the plants have to be large to understand that. Because now that I'm talking about the plants which are big and conspicuous, large plants, then only they'll be attracted by the agents, like the insect and the butterfly and the birds, etc. Plants are large. They are usually brightly colored. That's very simple. They usually emit scents. Remember, these insects that we are talking about, they also can recognize chemicals. They also release chemicals from their body, and they also can recognize similar type of chemicals that the floral plants release. They produce nectar. So what I'm understanding here, if it's an insect pollinated flower, that flower has to be bright and big, has to produce nectar, has to produce some scents. So nectar is something like tempting them not to come for to get into the deeper parts of the flower and come in contact with the nectaries and then take the nectar. So in that process, the pollen grains will get attached to their body, the butterfly, bee, wasp, whatever. And then now that they go and move into another flower, they are dropping their pollen, and the process of pollination would happen, cross-pollination would happen. Come to the next one, the pollen grains. When the flower goes on one flower, and the flower goes on one flower, certainly. And if we go on one flower, they start nectar and the pollen grains attached to the body. So when they go on another flower, the pollen grains fall on the flower. But still some of the flower pollen grains attached to the honey. When they go to another flower, pollen grains again fall on the flower. Obviously, and even if it remains stuck also to your body, after some time it's cell like cells. So these are not germs that it is going to cause any harm to the organism. So never mind, they are generally around 4 or 5 flowers. At the same time, they are favoring the process of pollination. Tip number 5. Pollen grains are sticky. Pollen grains are sticky. Pollen grains are hairy. Pollen grains are sticky, spiny. So what do you understand by pollen grains are sticky? The pollen grain, which is a very small structure, granular structure, generally has got a large amount of small hair-like structures. So what would this hair-like structure generally be? Another thing, come in contact with the body of the insects. If they are slippery and greasy, will they ever get attached? They will not get attached. No? If they're hairy and pricky and sticky, then only they get remain attached to the surface of the insect body, wings, or even the stigma. And if they're smooth and slippery and greasy, they'll not. They just fall off. No. So pick number 5. Number 6, the stigma is sticky. Stigma also needs to be sticky to favor the process of pollination. Remember, stigma does not generally hang out from the plant. In certain plants, now that I'm talking about insect pollination, remember, hanging out. What is it about hanging out? I will talk about a particular plant, just may the anther may be something like this. The anther may be something like this. इसको बोलेंगे hanging out characteristic. तो ये जो basic characteristics होता है, this is basically our characteristics of wind pollinated plants, not an insect pollinator. You'll come across later. Wind pollinated plants में ये feature होता है. But if it is a insect pollinator, then what will be the characteristic of the anther? It is something like this. The anther will be something inwards. The anther filament will be inwards. Next is the stigma is sticky. Okay. Number 7, very, very important. Number 7, the plants need to be in clusters to make them conspicuous. If I talk about insect pollinated flower, I talk about an insect pollinated flower, something like the China rose, hibiscus. Hibiscus, so as it is a prominent flower here, conspicuous flower, bright color, big petals. So there are some flowers which are having small petals also, something like the jasmine, the morning glory, petals. So काफी बार ये जो flowers है, we get to see them all in a cluster coming together. No, a particular node say they would develop all of them and almost about some 20-30 flowers all coming together forming a bunch. So actually हर एक flower छोटा है, every particular flower is small, inconspicuous है. But now that they cluster together, that entire cluster is attractive. The entire cluster, which is almost 10-20 flowers together, now resulting in the formation of a red or a pink or a yellow bunch of flowers. So it is attracting the agent. Number 7 is important. Now we talk about example images underline. Now we talk about the wind pollinated flowers. What are some of the characteristics of wind pollinated flowers? See the difference. Wind pollinated flowers. What are the differences? Should the wind pollinated flowers be large and conspicuous? Not necessarily. They may be small enough. Wind pollinated flowers, should they produce scent and nectar and bright color? They reasonable. But if I talk about the pollen grain, that's one major feature. If I talk about the pollen grain, if it is a wind pollinated plant, the pollen grain should be produced by the anther in large numbers. If it is a wind pollinated plant, the anther and the filament arrangement would be mostly like this, outwardly hanging. Taki, if there's a stroke of air, a breeze, at the stroke of air, the anther will break and the pollen will start releasing and get mixed with the air. Carried by the air, dispersal carried by the air. Let us see the characteristics. They are usually not bright colors. Come to the next. Number 3, they do not produce nectar or scent. Number 4, take that one, very, very important. They are long and out of the flower to be exposed to wind. Anthers are large and loosely attached. Again, I talk about the anther something here. Comparatively, when I talk about a flower which is insect pollinated, the anther and the filament are bit firmly attached. Because now that the insect is moving, the insect is a strong source. Agar anther थोड़ा loosely attached रहेगा, the moment the bee is entering and coming out, then the anther only will fall off. And if the anther will fall off, how will the pollen come out? The pollen is not coming out, no? The pollen should come out. अब इसमें क्या हो रहा है? By the stroke of the wind, by the stroke of the wind, by the stroke of the wind, this side or this side, since the anther is just loosely attached, either the anther is carried away and bursts, or the anther as it is here only it bursts out, and the pollen will be all released out. This is tip number 5. Pollen is produced in large quantities, as we already said. The pollen grains are light, dry, and moist. Take that. Pollen grains light, dry, moist, and smooth also. And number 8, the stigma are feathery. Stigmas are feathery. What about the insect pollinated? We said stigma is sticky, hairy. Example, we underline some. When we are talking about the wind pollinated are maize. Examples are maize. Water pollinated. Example, what are some of water pollinated? Hydrilla, Fertilisation. What are some of the characteristics? Let's see. The pollen grains are produced again in large number. That's a common feature. Now we talk about number 2. That's very, very important point. In this class, what would happen is the pollen grains would have a specific gravity almost equal to that of the water, so that they remain floating. So in this class, when I talk about the aquatic plants, mostly what happens, the flowers are almost floating on the surface of the water. The flowers are almost floating on the surface of the water. Something like I will talk about the surface of the water like this, and I understand that the roots and the parts of the plants may be all below the surface. And here now the flowers are here. Flowers are here on the surface of the water. But now that I talk about that ये एक और flower है, and the anther is all here. The anther is all here. The pollen all released. So the pollen should neither come in contact this way, or the pollen will fall in the water surface and then reach the other flower, which is also on the surface of the water. So again, I will talk about that there is another type of plant here, and the petals are something like this. So here, if the surface of the water, the flower is on the surface of the water, then only the pollen will enter into the flower. So this anthers which are releasing the pollen should come on the surface of the water, because most of the times for this type of plants, the flowers are on the surface of the water. The male flowers which are releasing the pollen will fall on the surface of the water, and with the help of water currents only they will be carried and reaching the female flowers, the stigma. With the help of water current, we will reach. Tip number 2, a very important point there. Example. So number 3, that is what we talked about. That's why male flowers are such that they float on the surface. Male flowers are basically on the surface of the water, and the female flowers also would be again coming. The female flowers would also have their parts conspicuous, but they would have the stigma almost on the surface of the water, so that they can receive the pollen. Underline examples like the Fertilisation, etc. This already I gave you the other day examples of flowers which are pollinated by birds, examples of flowers pollinated by elephants, etc. Now we do some questions and then I'll do this. I'll explain in that. First, let us complete this. Now, 2-3 questions. Number 1. Write 3 differences between. Write 3 differences between. Write 3 differences between wind pollinated. Write 3 differences between wind pollinated and insect pollinated flowers. 3 differences between wind pollinated and insect pollinated flowers. Make a table and we'll write. And number 2, give reason. Number 2, give reason. Give reason. Flowers of, give reason. Flowers of dahlia. Flowers of dahlia are always in clusters. That's number 1. For give reason, flowers of dahlia are always in clusters. For number 2, Number two, the anthers of wind pollinated flowers. Anthers of wind pollinated flowers are loosely attached to the filament. Anthers of wind pollinated flowers are loosely attached to the filament. Now, I'll give you just 5 minutes to answer this question. So, first question you will answer in a table. Make a table and write proper 3 points. Make a table and write proper 3 points. Now, which are the most important points that you are going to write? Let me tell you. Which are the most important points that you are going to write? I asked you to write a difference between wind and insect. Wind and insect pollinated. The first point that we have to write is number 2. Based on number 2, after clicking there, insect pollinated. Tick those points, and based on these points only, you will write down the difference. Tick number 2 from insect pollinated, and based on that, if it is insect pollinated, the flowers need to be brightly colored and showy. Yes or no? So the other side for wind pollinated, what will you write? The flowers need not be brightly colored and showy. So that's the first one that you will write. Number 2, what will you write? Number 2, what will you write?
The insect they need to produce nectar.
Acha. Okay.
And they are scented.
So this will be all considered more or less as the same type of points. Nectar, color, scent, more or less the same. Now next is you will write the pollen grains are based on the 6th point. You will write the next difference. The second difference you will write pollen grains are sticky or spiny. If it is insect pollinated, pollen grains are sticky or spiny. And if it is wind pollinated, pollen grain should be light and dry, and smooth. What would be the third point, Jeremy? What would be the third point? What would be the third point, Bolo? What I told you, I have drawn one diagram here.
They hang out.
If it is insect pollinated,
They are in clusters.
no, same point will likhna hai. If it is insect pollinated, the anthers are not outwardly hanging out. And if it is wind pollinated, the anthers are outwardly hanging out. Did you all hear what I said? Did you all hear what I said? So what is the first point on what? Which point you are writing on the first difference? Brightly colored है या नहीं? तो उसमें ही तुम एक साथ में लिख सकते हो. If you want to write nectar and scent, एक ही साथ आ जाएगा. The flowers pollinated by insects should be brightly colored, scented, and with nectar. एक ही साथ. Don't break this up to write 3 points. हाँ? अच्छा, ये हो गया the first set of points. Second point on what basis I told you to write. Characteristic of the pollen grain. Pollen grain sticky and spiny. And for wind pollinators, pollen grain is light, dry, smooth. And the third point I asked you to write on is characteristics of the anther. If it is insect pollinated, anthers are not outwardly hanging, and if it is wind pollinated, anthers are outwardly hanging. चलो लिखो फटाफट. लिखो पास. Not more than 5 minutes, huh? Don't take too much of time. Now, if you finish the differences, go to the give reason questions. Start. I'm going to ask you in 2 minutes. Fटाफट करो. Done. Give reason. The first one is done. Where is the next exam for you?
October 8.
Motion already given.
No.
Now this chapter is coming. And after this, see it's also there.
It must be actually.
Now answer that which next to it means coming with 100 letters. Okay, what is the first give reason? First give reason क्या है? हाँ. The flower is a smiling beauty. Every time he is smiling. Follow. The flowers are valuable to be clustered to make them conspicuous, especially in cases when they be flower. What language are you speaking? Very good. The flowers of the I did not ask you to read loud. Clear. The flowers of dahlia tend to be in clusters. For what reason? To make them auspicious, especially in cases of auspicious. Auspicious. Auspicious को तुमने hybrid बना दिया. Auspicious कौन सा word होता है?
Yes.
Conspicuous.
Conspicuous.
और girls hybrid बना दिया word. Conspicuous होता है. करेक्ट बस लिखा. Conspicuous. Prominent. Conspicuous मतलब prominent होना. Complete करो आंसर complete करो बेटा. Especially in cases where individual flowers are small. Small. Very good. Bhakti. Next. Anthers of wind pollinated flowers are loosely attached to the filaments. The anthers are loosely attached to the filaments so that the stylus may move them. May move them or break them to release the pollen. Okay. So this is what you are writing. Next, what are we going to study? Or break them. At the slightest stroke of the wind, the anther pollen sac will be broken to release the pollen, to discharge the pollen. So we talk about now this part of the chapter, very, very important. What are some of the reasons that the plants flower should show the process of cross pollination? Nature gave us cross pollination, so the characteristics that we are going to talk about. Let us see one by one. Orthogamy is also there that we are going to study, and heterostyling. Let us see. First is when we are talking about a condition known as unisexuality. What is meant by unisexuality? Unisexuality means we are talking about flowers which has only one type of a reproductive organ. A flower which has only the male reproductive organ. What is it called?
Stem.
And a flower which has only female is pistil. So now, if I talk about a unisexual flower, can I give you one example?
Papaya.
Palm and papaya. I talk about some other examples like the goat, the bitter goat is there, the pumpkin is there. Now, what is the difference between the papaya and the bitter goat or the pumpkin? Here, the papaya and the palm that I'm talking about are also unisexual, where they have got separate male plants and separate female plants. What are these type of plants? Dioecious. And this other side I'm talking about pumpkin and gourd and all these. These are also unisexual. Let's go. We get to see the same plant, half are male flowers, half are female flowers. So monoecious. So remember those words again. Monoecious plants. Monoecious plants. What is the meaning of monoecious plant? A plant which has both male and female flowers, same plants. And dioecious plants meaning a plant which is only male flowers and a plant which bears only female flowers. Okay. But now you tell me that if I have to understand cross pollination, if I have to understand where's the technology? So now that I talk about unisexuality, can you tell me what is the relation between unisexuality and cross pollination? If a flower, now all these examples we have been talking about just now. I said gourd is a unisexual flower. I said papaya is a unisexual flower. So इसमें कोई cross pollination होने का कोई chance है? I'm sorry, self pollination होने का कोई chance है? वैसे भी नहीं है. So if a flower is unisexual, obviously this particular flower has to follow the process of cross pollination. Whether you are talking about a monoecious plant or you talk about a dioecious. Okay, so that is the first concept to understand, that if a plant is unisexual, if a flower is unisexual, is there any scope that that particular plant ever undergoes the process of self-pollination? Never. It's not possible at all. Let us talk about the second one, dichogamy. What is the meaning of dichogamy? Let us see. What is the meaning of dichogamy? Dichogamy means different maturation timings of the male and the female reproductive part of a plant. So now, to be very clear, first of all, we are understanding that if this is the thalamus So, consequently, important parts of the plant of the so far the process of reproduction is concerned. I understand this part and this part should be maturing at the same time. The stigma and the anther should be maturing at the same time, because the stigma will be, the anther will be releasing and the stigma will be receiving. So the male parts, we generally say that the male reproductive organ and female reproductive organ should be maturing at the same time. Neither the process of pollination may not work out. No? Even if it is a bisexual plant. Can you give me an example of a bisexual plant? Hibiscus. P. So now, when I talk about this, let us try understanding dichogamy. What is it? Dichogamy is a condition where in a flower, the male and the female reproductive organs are not maturing at the same time. Different maturity timings of the male and the female reproductive organ. Just see here. If I say that the pollen has started releasing, meaning the stamen was mature enough to produce the pollen, but after pollen यहाँ पे आया है, the stigma is not even mature. The inner regions known as the ovary and all not yet mature. So ये pollen which has already come in contact with the stigma, can they undergo the process of germination? Can we show the process of fertilization later? No. So is it not this pollen is just a waste? Yes, all this pollen that the plant produced, flower produced are just a waste. At the same time, we also come across that the stigma is already mature, but the pollen are not ready to be released. And what is the lifetime of the anther and the stamen and the carpel, if I say that way? If a flower, well, what would be the maximum lifetime of a flower, lifespan of a flower? Hardly 1 to 2 days. So a flower, majority of the cases, exceptions are there, but majority of the cases, if I'm talking about a flower, majorly will rise, bloom, and by the time it shrinks and shrivels and falls down, it's at the most maximum, it is 2 to 3 days, which is 2 to 3 days. Within that, they will fall and the new flowers will come up. So in that period, if the maturity of the male and the female plant has not happened at the same time, then is this plant ever give rise to any seed? Fertilization हो पाएगा कभी? कुछ नहीं हो पाएगा. So that is what we are talking about dichogamy. Remember the definition right now. Different maturity timings. Different maturity timings of the male and female reproductive parts of the flower. Different maturity timings of the male and female reproductive parts of the flower. Different maturity timings of the male and female reproductive parts of the flower. Now, here we talk about two types. This you have to remember. Now that I'm talking about dichogamy, I will talk about a type of a flower which is known as protandrous. Protandrous. I will talk about examples like the sunflower, like the salvia. And I will talk about protogyny. I will talk about examples like the people. Some common examples. So now यहाँ पे क्या हो रहा है? What is the difference? Protandry and protogyny. In case of protandrous flowers, the male flower, the male parts develop, mature, but by the time this has not matured enough. So even if the pollen are released and coming here, the pollen is all the pollen, so many of them just a waste, because the stigma is still not ready to receive. Fertilization nothing. So what is a protandrous flower? What did I tell you just now? What is a protandrous flower?
And the male part is
where a flower where the male parts mature much faster than the female parts. Similarly, if I talk about a protogynous flower, protogyny, what is it? A protogyny is a flower, a protogynous flower is a flower where the female part is already matured, but the male part hasn't. The female parts of the flower are much faster than the male parts. Examples you have to remember. So here what are we understanding? Now listen, until the stamen and the carpel are maturing at the same time, fertilization cannot happen. So in this case, we are studying that maybe I'm talking about protandrous flower. But what are you understanding? Salvia is a unisexual or a bisexual flower? What are you understanding from this? Salvia एक bisexual है क्या? Unisexual flower है? Bisexual है ना? Salvia is a. It is salvia. Salvia is a bisexual flower, but इसमें male part mature हो जाता है, but female mature तब तक नहीं होता. That's why it is considered as a protandrous flower. People, bisexual है कि unisexual है? Bisexual है. But इसको protogynous क्यों कहा गया है? Why is it a protogynous flower? Because इसमें stamen mature हो जाता है, but by that time the stamens are not yet mature.
It still gets matured.
हाँ, what did I say? हाँ, carpels get mature, pistils get mature, but तब तक anther or stamens are not yet mature. Did you understand this? So that is what is called dichogamy, different maturity timings. So dichogamy के दो types क्या हो सकते हैं? Either the flower is protogynous or the flower is protandrous. So protogyny या तो protandry या तो protogyny. We talk about self sterility. Self sterility किसे कहते हैं? What is self sterility? I may understand a bisexual plant. इसमें male parts भी है, female parts भी है, stamen भी है, carpel भी है, but still the stamen may not give rise to well developed pollen, and the carpel may not give rise to well developed ovules, or stigma may not be well developed. Reproductive organ है, but reproductive cells नहीं बन सकता. If I have to put it very clear. So here, what is the meaning of self sterility? ये animals में भी होता है self sterility, where the reproductive organs are there, but the reproductive well-defined reproductive cells जो reproduction कर पाए नहीं हो सकता. So now if I'm talking about self sterility, you have to remember when I talk about majorly examples of sunflower. Sunflower is one of the best examples that you can write for self sterility. So sunflower में ये हमेशा देखा जाता है. It's a bisexual. तो sunflower क्या हुआ? Unisexual है कि bisexual? Bisexual है. But यहाँ पे काफी बार we get to see that reproductive organs होने के साथ though the reproductive organs are there, but are they capable of giving rise to well-defined reproductive cells? No. And that's the reason कोई एक तरह का reproductive organ शायद not functional enough. So that's the reason even though they are bisexual, cell pollination maybe stamen is not well mature enough, reproductive से pollen नहीं बना पा रहा है, या तो carpel is not well developed enough and हाँ तो carpel ये नहीं हो रहा है, ovules नहीं बना पा रहा है. So can they carry on the process of cell pollination even though they are bisexual? नहीं. So they may depend on the process of cross pollination. No? They may depend on the process of cross pollination. So that is why we are talking about self sterility का क्या मतलब है? What is the meaning of self sterility? Now we talk about hercogamy. Hercogamy and heterostyle. Remember, there's a basic difference here. Again, I'm talking about hercogamy, where I talk about a flower. If I talk about hercogamy, what is it? I am talking about the stigma. इसमें stigma में development में कोई problem नहीं है. ये तो मेरे तरफ से तुमको क्वेश्चन जाना चाहिए था, क्या हुआ? By looking at your naughty face, I can easily understand something is going on. वही तो मैं तुमको पूछना चाहती थी, but I cannot afford that much of time because just 10 minutes बाकी है. Now, what is hercogamy? So when I'm talking about hercogamy, let us understand both parts. What is hercogamy? Hercogamy में condition ये है कि there is no problem with the development of the stigma, carpel, stigma, style, ovaries सब developed है. But then still, when I talk about ये जो pollen है, which is getting released from the anther in adequate number, they are not able to come in contact with the stigma. क्यों? शायद there is a extra tissue which has developed between the stigma and the pollen. See, in case of human also, or other animals also, there are some extra growth we come across. Some extra growth near the ears, some extra growth in the fingers, some extra growth in the. So flowers से भी ऐसा हो सकता है कभी कभार. So now the pollen जो easily stigma में in contact they could have come because the anther and the stigma they are close. There would have been ample chances of self pollination because it's a bisexual flower. But अभी क्या हो रहा है? The pollen which is getting released cannot still come in contact with the stigma in large number because the stigma, the upper part of the stigma is somewhat covered by a leaf-like structure, which is an additional growth in that flower. एक defective additional growth है, additional tissue है present. So it is something, it is defined like this: an additional barrier, एक barrier, एक extra tissue growth जो stigma को cover करता है partially and not allow adequate amount of the pollen to come in contact with the stigma. If this is the condition, this is what you talk about as hypogamy. Understood? This is what is understood as hypogamy. Then again, you tell me, if I'm talking about an example of hypogamy, say suppose I talk about an example of hypogamy, the most common example is fancy, those yellow, pink plants that you come across, no? Fancy. Fancy is the unisexual or a bisexual plant? Bisexual. So ये bisexual होने के बावजूद भी ये defects की वजह से, this structural defect के वजह से, they have to depend on cross pollination. क्योंकि ये जो pollen है, this pollen now may come in contact with other stigma surrounding flowers के other stigma में भी they may come across, and other process of cross pollination may happen. What is heterostyling? Different length or height. Now, heterostyling में क्या होता है? I talk about heterostyling. Sometimes we come across that ये जो stigma है and the anther is like this. यहाँ पे we may come across ये जो stigma है and the anther is like this. Now you tell me, in either of the cases, is it possible कि self pollination हो पाए? But both the flowers are bisexual. You understand from the figure itself, no? Both the flowers are bisexual. इसमें क्या होगा? If the pollen are released, the pollen would basically not fall on the stigma. एक तो the filament is too long, the height of the stigma is too short. Chances are much lesser. Chances less हो जाता है. Chances are less because एक तो if they are hanging almost outwardly and much at a height, when the dispersal happens, most of them will fall on the leaf or the soil or etc. or carried by wind, and some only would fall. If they would be hanging and almost at the same level like this, then the chances are much more. Chances are much more. So यहाँ पे since they are at a different height, big difference between the height of the anther and the height of the stigma. So as it is, the chances become much lesser. The chance of the pollen falling on the stigma becomes much lesser. So in this case, what are you coming up as heterostyling? In heterostyling, here what is happening? In one condition, the height of the filament is much more than the height of the stigma. In another condition, the height of the stigma is much more and the filament is not shorter. इसमें तो वैसे भी chances as it is बहुत कम होगा. In this type of plants, as it is, chances are much lesser. So what is the difference that you will write between heterostyling and hypogamy?
There is an additional value which cover the stigma. In heterogamy,
The height of the male and the female reproductive parts are extremely, or they are wide apart. The difference in the height is much better.
In this condition, the answer are outward, right? Always.
Zygotal, they are outwardly placed. Even if they are inwardly placed also, it has been found that the anther, after they get released, they either fall in the inner space of the plant or on the leaf, and very few would come in because there's a big difference, no? Now that the pollen comes out, only few will fall on the. If they would have been almost at the same length, now that the pollen comes, most of them will get stuck on the stigma. So this is quite a good. Now, three questions. Number one. In flowers like Pansy and Iris, which are bisexual flowers, or in bisexual flowers like Pansy and Iris straight away again, right? In bisexual flowers like Pansy and Iris, Self-pollination does not take place. Self-pollination does not take place. Self-pollination does not take place. Give reason. Give reason. Next. Give reason. Next, number 2. Number 2. What is meant by self-sterility? What is meant by self-sterility? What is meant by self-sterility? Question mark. Why does flowers like orchids? Flowers like orchids always depend on cross-pollination. Always depend on cross-pollination. Number 3. Number 3. Number 3. Write 2 differences between herpogamy and heterostyle. Write 2 differences between herpogamy and heterostyle. Write 2 differences between herpogamy and heterostyle. The 2 tables that you have in your book, table 5.1 and table 5.2. This has to be read where? We may take these 2 tables in your book also. 5.1, 5.2. You have to read all these points very carefully. We already discussed all. Now the next part of this chapter, this 3 question remains as homework. Now the next next part of the chapter, we turn to page 42. Turn to page 42. Now I'm talking about this part. I'm talking about this part of the chapter. Now in this part of the chapter, where the process of wind and insect pollination in males and females is explained. Is it there in your question? I don't think so. Eh? This generally we don't teach in detail.
It's not in detail.
Just self-study. This is there.
Taking on the 3 states I'm told, the standard flower, wing pattern, and
these are the basic structure of the pea plant. So इसमें actually to know the process. If I talk about the process of pollination in bee, it is insect pollinated. Males, it is wind pollinated. So here, basically, first of all, you have to know you will have to have a basic idea about the structure of the plant first, and then how exactly the insect enters, and then the process of pollination. So, if I give you a basic fair idea, later you will just figure out details of this is actually not needed. You will generally not get any descriptive question of this. Hardly one of the objectives you don't get. Look at this diagram here. The pea flower, the pea flower. So the pea flower, if I say, has got some roundish kind of petals. Okay, so it has got some standard big petals and then 2 big petals, keel, which are the small petals. So actually the insect, if you just look into the flower, I don't have that image right now. So if you look into the flower, you may come across that right from the front side, which is known as the dorsal side, the frontal side, no? Right from the front side, if the insect would enter, it would first of all come in contact with the anthers. The moment the insect starts meandering inside, it is actually pressing those small petals, and the moment, because the insect will try to take a support on those petals, no? So the moment it will try to take a support on the petals will get forced inside and it will come in contact with the pollen. And now that it keeps on hopping and moving from one flower to another, it favors the process of pollination. So the basic idea is that, okay. Males, what's happening? Males, again, you see the anthers are basically in a bundle, tassels, if you see there. If you see the full tassels there. So the males plant is something like this, where the anthers are all in a bunch, something like those broomsticks. All in a bunch like that. And then now there's a stroke of wind. What happens? They all get scattered. And it's just like a storm of those pollen that comes out. No, that's the reason the dispersal is also much faster. And it will come in contact with the female flowers, and the female flowers are just below. You see, the female flowers are just below. The stigma is just below, and then they'll come in contact with the stigma. So if I talk about this type of pollination, where the pollen is being carried by the wind and comes in contact with the female flower, what type of a plant maize is? What type of a plant it is? Anemophilus. Anemophilus is the anemophilus plant. Now let us progress check in page number 43. But the next class tomorrow again I have got a lecture with you now. Tomorrow I'm going to complete this part. So homework you will complete at home. And the exercise that progress check. 3 questions I gave you that you have to complete as homework today. Tomorrow you will see the answer. We'll discuss the answers tomorrow. Yeah, very good. Ashika, no, Ashika run. Fast. Now that we have studied nature favors cross-pollination, we have to remember examples for each category, at least one example for each category you remember. Sometimes you are asked questions like this also. Why do plants like people don't show self-pollination? So at that time, you will have to answer. Your answer should have this word. So इसके लिए तुमको ये जानना बहुत जरूरी है. People is what type of a plant. So this characteristics, understanding the speeches are simple, but यहाँ पे ये examples you have to remember one. Something like if I give you why do plants like sunflower do not show the process of self-pollination? So your answer should be sunflower though it is a bisexual flower, it is a sterile flower. It's a sterile flower. That's the reason the process of self-pollination cannot happen and it depends on cross-pollination actions. So that should be our answer. Then all of you, what are the answers there? Any doubt there? Nothing. And those two tables that I asked you to read, I'm not starting that next topic now because we not be able to finish anything. It's a continuous one. वो टेबल जो मैंने बोला है just go through देखो सारे points if it is clear. If there's anything, any point not clear, tell me right now. Those two tables 5.1, 5.2. I think 5.1 and 5.2. This article to this day, actually got the absent today, no?
हम किसी को पता है
इन लोगों को बोला श्रेया को नहीं कुछ नहीं है श्रेया से
मैंने इसको मैसेज किया जैसे अभी इसको बोला मैंने कि इस फादर और मदन को बोल दिया इसको बोल दिया श्रेया को श्रेया की आदत
लेवल तो मुझे मतलब एक मिनट 10 मैंने ब्रीफ आना है जब मैसेज मिला
नहीं जब मैंने मैसेज देखा
okay those points are these points all clear Basically, from this chapter, you will get enough of give reasons, example-based questions, and differences. Okay. If you are done with this, the 3 questions that I gave you, they will maybe 1 or 2 minutes. You have reached out, you can ask. अब ये 3 questions जो मैंने दिया है, करो कि अगर कंप्लीट हो जाता है जब से three questions, you may just read. अगर कुछ doubt नहीं है, you can fill that as well. Will you be able to write? No? Will you be able to write all the 3 answers? आता है? Can you complete that homework? You write.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. You? You are in it. Strike a line. Call.
ये तो ठीक है मैंने और फिर बना रहा तो क्या कुछ हुआ मेरा घंटे को बहुत लगा मेरा उतना किया नहीं देखो आईडिया हैरी जे एक पेड़ दिखाने के लिए हैरी जे कर अभी के पास नहीं
अबे पेपर देने को मैं पूछा करने बोला
अपने को 20 में 20
हाँ तो नहीं देखती ना